Let's look at our login application here. We're going to build on the user registration that we've had. You can sign up and sign in. You can also check the database as we've done already, add things from the database side, or you can register there with some sample data. We're just going to deal with the login and then how we're going to log out actually. We'll also look at account information. So I know that I have a user ID of 25 and most of the passwords I entered were 123456. And you can see if we look in the database that we have this table users here. And you can pick a user ID based on what you've already looked at if you take a look at the browse. And then you're going to be able to grab the user ID because we force a user ID to be used. And you can see that we can't grab the password there. But I always use the same password, so you might want to try the same thing, 123456. And then you can log in effectively. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to log in. Now, if we don't log in correctly, you can see that this message is going to come back. Similar to the user registration, it works the same way. We have to use the right password. When we log in correctly, then we have some session information. Now, this may happen to you. You might have a whole bunch of information here. This looks like some of the other things we were working on using the session, and that's the case. Since we're dealing with a project list here that has a lot of different examples, we're kind of putting session variables in on many occasions here. So what you want to do is you can read the session here. That only has certain things that were used that we need to read there, not everything. You can actually destroy it, and then you can go back and log in. 25, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And you're only going to see a certain amount of data that is only necessary for this section. So don't be alarmed if you see too much information there. It's only because you probably were using something else, another registration form, and we do a lot with this session. Now, another thing I mentioned that you can't see the password there. This is MD5 encryption, like I mentioned, just in case you didn't see that yet. But this is encrypted, and that's already going to be in this particular routine, and we can take a peek at that. But that's how it works. Now, you can't actually get back to the login page. I have some code in there to prevent that. You try the login page, and you're jumping back here because it's checking to see if you're logged in. And it checks the session first here. And it also checks to see if you're logged in, and that's set to true. 1 is true. And the null there, nothing there, is false, if it's a true or false that you're expecting there, as we know. You have to log out first, and that forces you back to this page. And you can't go to the account page. You can't go back there. It's going to force you to jump here. Because if you're not logged in, you're not going to be given access to those pages. And then we can log in again. So we'll see how this works. The first thing, we'll look at the account page. It's going to be easier to look at that. We know the cache here. Always do that. That way you know you're not going to give the client the impression that they're actually logged in when they're not. So this is not going to use cached information. Then we do the familiar check to see if that session variable is set. You want to take a look at the session videos if you're skipping around, and that's going to be explained there, and also the web form videos. If you don't know how to use require statements or include statements, then you want to take a look at the include or require statements as well, which is important in the functions section. We're using the include file that's coming from the root of our website here, include session init. Here we have session init. And in this, we set this value to true if it wasn't set. And we only do that once. We don't want to do it more than once. And if we look here back at the account, if that isn't set, then we know we have to include it. And then we can check to see if you're logged in. If it's not equal to true, you could also put not of this session to check for false. But if it's not equal to true, then you want to relocate to the login system.php. That's the login page. And that's why you redirect there. And that's all you really need to care about, really. You have some other information that's just looping through the session. We've already seen that, and it just outputs the first name of the user. We've seen this a lot. Check out the arrays videos and other videos for examples on how we use these key value pairs with for each, even the for videos if you're skipping around. And so that's the session init. We know how that works. So the login system, it works similar to the user registration page. So check that out. That area here, it's checking a flag to see if it's yellow, red, or blue. So if your account hasn't been verified, that's only used if you have an email verification routine. If the user ID password's not in a database, then you actually want to have a red flag come back here, and then you just output that in the middle of the page here, as you've seen in other examples. And you don't want to say your username's not right or your password's not right. You don't want to let them know that the password's not right, but the username is. Things like that. Just be generic in that case. Your session can also expire. After a certain amount of time, you can change this expiration. It's also going to be set up based on your hosting provider, how they have that set up, but you can alter it. When your session expires, like when you have your mail accounts and things like that, your webmail, you know that it can expire after 20 or 30 minutes, and you can expect the same thing when you're working with your websites here, when you develop your own PHP. So that's the login system. It just passes in and comes back if there's a problem. We've seen that, so we can move on to other things as well. Same cache information, and the opposite here, we're checking to see if it's logged in. If it's true, go to the account page. All right, this is the register page that we're used to for registering. This is the user registration form. We know how that works as well, and this is just a part of the exercise to continue it to make it more robust. Now, all we do when we log in is we actually log into a page here, and then at the end we redirect if there's a problem here. If there's a problem. If there's no problem, then we go to the account page, and that's one nested up because this is in the scripts folder, logged in. I always use a logged in to check if I can do this. We check the session again, session init if it's not there. We don't want anyone to use any of our pages that have a logging system here that are protected in some way. So we require that session. We do a session start. We check for that. And then if it isn't the case that certain things are met, certain conditions are met, then we jump them over to the login page. Otherwise, we go to the account page. So we check for the user ID and password. We make sure that the user ID is numeric. This is all important stuff here to make sure that we don't have to go back to that form. We are going back if the password or username aren't there, or if it's not a numeric value here, because the user ID in the database is numeric. We select from that table, just like any other selection. We grab where that user ID is equal to this user ID. We connect, select our database, check to see if the user is not present there using the MySQL affected rows. If we don't get anything back, then it has to be 1. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem. Go back to the login page. If it's greater than 1, you have a database problem because you shouldn't have more than one user ID there. But that shouldn't happen with a certain kind of database, a certain kind of table that has unique values on that user ID. So if it's not 1, then we can go back to the login page and set another flag of red, but we pass the user ID so they can try again. We're friendly like that. Make sure you have the exit on the end of that too, so we don't continue to go into this page. We know about that. Now we use the fetch associate. You can see the other MySQL functions on the php.net site. And this is the result based on what we did up here with the query. That's the query that's passed, and the result is here. And we work with the result. This is outside of the result, but it is returning a value based on what we did. Now we do a string compare to our row that is returned, because this is a key value pair type array. It's returned to row. We can check for password, which is the database field. The MD5 here is actually going to be able to compare the database row, the MD5 with the password in between. This is going to take the password and use MD5 encryption to actually compare it to the already encrypted password that's in the database, because we did this when we inserted the data. So when we do it again, this is not a two-way street here. It's only one way. So the password is already MD5 encrypted, and there's no way to go backwards. We have to MD5 another password. If it's the same exact password, then that value is going to match, and that's how we check to see if the passwords are correct. Otherwise, we're going to go back with the flag set to red and then give the user ID back, so we can be nice to at least have the user ID for the user. If that's not a problem, we're going to then set the session variables and then relocate to the account. The session variables are based on the data that's received from the database, and that's from the row you can see that this has already been set. The email, user ID, and user type. If that's used at all, this isn't going to be used, but the other ones are, meaning that the first name and the last name are going to be set, as well as the email can be set and other things that you're going to process there. It depends on what you have set there. This is really up to you to be able to set that there. It's really just there for an example of what you could set, but the user ID and password are most important. You can use this select star to actually grab enough data that you're going to process whatever row information you want based on the database. And do check out the database for that. You can see here we have the table. You can also see all the fields, and you can actually edit this as well and just look at the table users to see how it's made up, and you can grab any field that you want to use for this particular process. That's logged in. Just PHP, and then it's going to go to account if it's successfully logged in, or go back to the login system if not. That's the main functionality. And then logged out. That's it. We've already looked at this already, and this is exactly how we're going to log out in this example, like we did before when we're dealing with the other examples. As you can see, this code was taken from destroying sessions, which we have previous here. And if we go back, you see it's the same thing. Session start, still need to do that. You can do something like session equals array, which is empty, or you can do session unset. You can also unset the cookie, as I mentioned, and perform session destroy. All of this is going to work for you. Just, you can leave it like it is. And then after that, when the session is destroyed, you have to go somewhere else. And then that's when we're going to log in again, or try to. We'll go to the login page, and then you can see that this is going to have a clear session to work with. And that's pretty much how this is going to work. You can check out the code even more if you'd like. It's important to have the caching information here, that we're not going to cache this page. It's going to expire right away. So we always get this fresh. We don't go back and use something that's stored in the browser cache, because that won't destroy the session.